Throughout the course of history, men and women have lived and died. Looking back from this place in time, it is clear that people long ago really did some really dumb things. And in order to understand how they died, we must first understand how they lived. These are the stories of how they died. Even decades after her death, Marilyn Monroe remains one of the most famous and recognizable cultural icons of all time. During her short lifetime, Monroe overcame a difficult childhood, fought for the equality of others, and battled her own mental health issues. She burned as bright as the sun, and then that light was gone. Marilyn Monroe was born on June 1st, 1926 in Los Angeles, California. Her name given at birth was Norma Jean Mortensen. She was later baptized as Norma Jean Baker. For the first few years of her life, Norma was raised by her mentally ill mother Gladys, and despite all the speculation, she never knew her father. When her mother suffered a mental breakdown in 1937, she was taken in and raised by Grace and Doc Goddard. The deeply religious Goddards were paid $25 per week to care for her. As part of the religious doctrines that the Goddards followed, activities like going to the movies were off limits to Norma. Eventually, Doc's job transferred him to the East Coast, and the couple could not afford to take Norma with them. Norma would spend the rest of her childhood in different state-run homes and foster homes where she suffered abuse from her caregivers. In 1942, at the age of 16, Norma married James Doherty, a friend that lived nearby. James had joined the Merchant Marines, and Norma dropped out of high school and became a housewife. During the Second World War, as part of the war effort, Norma took a job working at a munitions defense plant. It was here, at her place of employment, where she was discovered by David Conover, who was taking morale-boosting pictures of women at work. This was a big break for Norma. In 1945, she signed with the Blue Book Model Agency and had begun to appear in magazine ads and covers. By the time her husband James returned in 1946, his wife had a successful career as a model. When she met an executive producer at 20th Century Fox, she was signed to a 6-month contract. With the contract came a new image and a new name. Norma dyed her hair blonde and began calling herself Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn came from the Marilyn Miller, a 1920s Broadway star, and Monroe was her mother's maiden name. By this time, Marilyn's mother had been institutionalized, but her agent made her pretend that her mother was dead. Marilyn's first role was a bit part as a waitress in the movie Dangerous Years. The executives at 20th Century Fox were not impressed with her performance and decided to let her contract lapse. Marilyn was determined to become a famous actress, and in 1947, she divorced her husband and began pursuing acting full-time. A year later, she was signed by Columbia Pictures and had several roles in minor motion pictures. It took 6 years of hard work, and it was Marilyn's performances in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and How to Marry a Millionaire in 1953 that made her a big-time star. Marilyn's breathy voice and hourglass figure soon made her one of Hollywood's most famous actresses. Monroe was constantly typecast in the same bubbly, dumb blonde roles in all of her movies, and soon people began to believe that she was just as dumb off camera as she was on camera. However, this was very far from the truth. Marilyn was actually very intelligent and an avid reader. She had her own very large library, and she was able to hold her own against the studios. During the 1950s, one of the most popular music venues was the Mocambo in Hollywood, the very place where Frank Sinatra made his Los Angeles debut. The Mocambo was often visited by the likes of Charles Gable, Charlie Chaplin, and Humphrey Bogart. At this time in history, African American musicians were facing significant adversity. Ella Fitzgerald was not allowed to perform at the Mocambo because of her race. Then, one of Ella's biggest fans made a call that altered the track of her career. Monroe promised the owner of the Mocambo that she would be front and center for every performance of Ella's, and she was. After that, Ella Fitzgerald never had to play a small jazz club ever again. Fitzgerald even said that Marilyn was ahead of her time, and she didn't even know it. In 1954, Marilyn married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio. Unfortunately, their marriage lasted less than a year, as Marilyn wanted to continue with her acting career, and DiMaggio wanted a full-time wife. They eventually divorced, but continued to remain friends. It was in 1955 that Marilyn appeared in Billy Wilder's comedy The 7-Year Itch, where the iconic photo of Marilyn standing over a sidewalk grate blowing up her skirt was created. Marilyn was getting tired of the dumb blonde roles and yearned to play the more dramatic roles. So she moved to New York to enroll in the New York Actors Studio, where she studied under the director Lee Strasberg. Marilyn also began psychotherapy at this time. Lee Strasberg was one of the movie industry's best directors. He had coached actors Marlon Brando, James Dean, Anne Bancroft, and more. Monroe had become very close to Strasberg. Actually, he had become sort of a father figure that Monroe never had. In 1956, Marilyn returned to Hollywood, where she ran into a playwright named Arthur Miller, who she had met a few years earlier. Miller was well educated and an exceedingly respected writer. Miller introduced Marilyn to his social circle of literary greats such as Truman Capote, Sal Bellow, and Carl Sandburg. With her high intellect, Marilyn seemed to fit right in with Miller's group of friends. Later that year, Monroe converted to Judaism and married Miller in June, with Lee Strasberg giving her away at a small wedding celebration. As newlyweds, the couple moved to an apartment in New York City, and Marilyn was as happy as she had ever been in her life. Eventually, she and Miller moved to London so that she could work on The Prince and the Showgirl. At this time, things began to unravel when Miller had left open his journal and Marilyn saw an entry that stated that he was disappointed in his marriage and that Marilyn was not as smart as he would have liked her to be. Upon reading the words that her husband wrote, Marilyn was devastated. But she had decided that she wanted to stay and work on her marriage. She also continued to rely heavily on prescribed barbiturates and alcohol in order to sleep. When the two returned from London, Miller was put under investigation for possible ties to the Communist Party. Marilyn stood by her husband's side while he was attacked by the House Un-American Activities Committee that was headed by Senator Joseph McCarthy. Marilyn's depression and anxiety was being compounded by her substance abuse, and her failing marriage to Miller was now causing her to lose acting roles and film projects, despite the fact she was successful and famous. In fact, Marilyn had begun filming the movie Something's Gotta Give with Dean Martin, but was eventually fired because of her inability to show up on time. Marilyn was now earning a reputation for being difficult to work with, as well as constantly intoxicated on the set. In 1960, Marilyn watched as her husband fell in love with another woman during the filming of the movie The Misfits. 3 months after filming began, Marilyn and Miller announced their separation. Marilyn sought help by entering a mental health facility in New York. When she finally returned to California, she purchased her first ever house in Brentwood. Marilyn surprisingly had little in the way of possessions, but the one thing she prized above all was an autographed photograph of Albert Einstein with the inscription, "To Marilyn, with respect and love and thanks." On May 19, 1962, Marilyn made an appearance at the Democratic fundraiser in Madison Square Garden. It was there that Marilyn sang Happy Birthday to President John F. Kennedy. After hearing Monroe's version of the song, President Kennedy remarked, "I can now retire from politics after having had a happy birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way." The performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President was one of the last performances Marilyn would make. 3 months later, on August 5, 1962, Marilyn Monroe died of an apparent overdose on sleeping pills. She was only 36 years old. Her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, took care of the funeral arrangements, and Lee Strasberg delivered the eulogy. Marilyn was interred at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles. Joe DiMaggio made sure that fresh red roses were placed at her grave every day for the next 20 years. Over the years, there has been much speculation about the circumstances surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death. Although her death was officially ruled a suicide, some believe that Marilyn may have been the victim of foul play. Rumors have abounded about the way in which her body was found. There has also been questions into the disappearance of a little red diary that Marilyn supposedly kept. The diary reportedly details Miss Monroe's relationship with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The secrets that it was said to contain could possibly have brought down a presidency. So what do you think happened to Marilyn Monroe? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to hear more stories of how they died, please give this video a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video. And I will talk to you next time. Bye, guys.